There you go. That's cool.
Items. Still, it counts. It has two wheels.
Absolutely. So we have one caller that's called in, and I don't know who that is. If they could identify themselves for the minutes, that'd be great. I was wondering if it might be Tom Seltzer, because oftentimes he'll call in.
All right, we'll just give it another minute and see if anybody else. Looks like somebody's joining in. And we're not expecting Michael tonight, right?
Correct.
Okay. This is Tom Seltzer. Can you hear me now? I changed the setting a little bit.
You can.
Yes, we can.
All right, good, good. Now I'm not hearing that.
And let me know when you're ready, Rodney. Did you want to run the screen? That's fine.
Sure, I can. That's fine. Yep, I'll just share the screen here. I think you have to share. I think you have to give me permission, Mayor.
Oh, I didn't realize it was my meeting.
It is. Yep.
Oh.
All
I set
right.
up so many meetings, I forgot which one I set up and which one I didn't.
Yep, I understand. All right.
All right. So we'll call this meeting to order. It is Monday, November 9th of 2020. This is the Plan Commission meeting. It looks like we have a quorum. So we'll begin by approving the minutes from the October 12th meeting. I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Robinson. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Caravello. Any questions or changes to the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Item number 3 is the council representative report. Alderperson Caravello.
Yes, just two things to report. At the October 13th council meeting, ordinance 19 of 2020, which was regarding the rezoning on Abel Court, was approved, and also 020 of 2020, which was the amendment relating to exterior lighting regulations, was also approved.
All right, thank you very much. Next would be the staff report. Rodney?
Standard kind of quick summary of a few projects. The one I do want to highlight is we think there's an offer pending on the former North American Fur building, but it hasn't actually closed yet, so we don't know where that stands. But at the time we wrote this, we thought it had been purchased by American Fence. American Fence has submitted a conditional use application for considering for outside storage that would be heard in December if they don't withdraw that request. Available to answer other questions. The mayor just also highlighted the activity on 700 Nygaard Street for the mixed use building with residential has started. They started earthwork out there recently as well.
I have a question about American Fence. Is American Fence the entity? Do they already have they're in the industrial park already? Or is that a different company that's next to Zoc Joseph's?
I think it's a different company.
Okay.
All right, any other questions?
Rodney, of those, the NAFA buildings, is it the one that is in the business park north or the one that is closer to Ortega, or have they still retained both of those buildings?
Yeah, the one that we're referring to is the one at Glacier Moraine Drive and Williams Drive. So the newest.
Okay.
building.
Okay,
not-
great.
We're not sure of the status of the facility on Ortega Drive. Near
Got it.
Ortega.
All right, any other questions? Item number 5 is a request by Mike Malling to amend the zoning ordinance section 78-722, parent 7, swimming pool standards. And you might recall this one was postponed from October 12th of 2020. Ryan, do you want to give us an update?
Sure. Staff attempted to try to massage the language to a certain degree related to fencing. I think there was general support to have some type of allowance for above ground pools if there is protection around the perimeter of the height of the fence above the rail. So I think we tried to do that. Mr. Barman's provided some language too that we can take a look at. I was going to just let you know that Mr. Mike Malling, who we kind of initiated this request because of his situation, isn't able to join us tonight. Situation that prevented him from joining us. I think it would be helpful to have his at least consideration, knowing that the issue doesn't have to be resolved prior to next spring. I think it would be okay to table it, but I certainly think that it would be appropriate if we wanted to have an internal discussion or a committee discussion about the standards even tonight. We can certainly do so. And Mr. Barman, I could put up on the screen some of the suggestions you prepared as well.
Yeah, I'm perfectly fine. If we don't have to make a decision tonight, it makes sense to let this stew for just a little bit. If you could zoom in up on that, I do want to just point out a couple things I think the commission should be aware of as I studied this, since I had volunteered with Michael Stacy to take more detailed look at this. A couple things that I really think are important to make sure we're aware of as commission members is that if you read the original language of this pool ordinance, there's a couple things that are clear. Number one, they're trying to have a fence that's high enough that you don't have inadvertent access to the pool. You make it 5 foot in height. You don't have toddlers and stuff that are going to stumble into the pool on a short fence. I think that's also one of the reasons why under paragraph 6 there's reference to the fence, that 5 foot fence being at least 4 feet from the pool edge. And I think that's just in case someone decides to jump over the fence, they don't be surprised if they also land in the pool. They'd be landing outside the pool. So that's one thing that's a little bit different with the pool style, the above ground pool where the fence is part of the pool wall. But because I think of the design, I don't think it's much of an issue where people would think to jump over that fence. It's pretty clear, I think, visually that it's a pool. Another thing I think it's important to understand is that in the original language, there's that reference to the gates being self-closing and self-latching devices. And the way I interpret that, again, is a safety issue that property owners, parents don't have to consciously latch the door. It's self-closing, self-latching, so you don't have forgetfulness come into play. So I honestly, when it was in the version that was sent out by Michael, included the option of just locking the gate instead of having the self-latching, self-closing. I'm not sure I would go for that myself, just because if you have to manually and consciously lock the gate, that changes the automatic safety feature. Couple other things I think Roddy might be able to chime in on. As I was reading paragraph 6 and 7, I think I would personally suggest that the addition of the above ground pool variation of this be up in paragraph 6 where I've included it rather than down in 7 under compliance. I don't think it makes sense to be down there. I think it makes more sense to be under the enclosure paragraph directly. I also, as I was reading through these 2 paragraphs, I personally find that there is some confusion in language between the last sentence in paragraph 6 and the first sentence in paragraph 7. Because one basically says that pools that already had a fence 40 inches high would be grandfathered. But under compliance, it says all swimming pools existing at the time of the passage of the chapter had to satisfactorily meet all the fence requirements. And so it's almost like 7 basically contradicts the last sentence of paragraph 6. So I think as commission, if we're going to clean this up, I think we should probably clean up those 2 sentences so that they're clear. So those are a few things that I thought were worthwhile. So in my version here, I just focused on trying to simplify the addition of the variation of the above ground pool with the additional fence height to just say that fence has to also be 5 foot high and that its gates or doorways have to follow the same access requirements as any other pool that's wrapped in the fence.
Any questions or comments from the commissioners about Commissioner Barman's thoughts?
Mayor, I just put up on the screen the illustration or a picture of kind of this sample that we've talked about. And in this case, I think we'd have to figure out how they could add, if you will, an area that could be fenced to be self-closing and self-latching. Mr. Barman, do you agree they'd have to modify that entrance point in some manner to really accomplish that? I'm not.
I forget the gentleman's name. He had said that you can put that this particular style comes with a gate option at the top of the stairs.
Okay.
I would hope that the gate could potentially be self-latching, self-closing. But I think the other option that I think makes even more sense is to add a small wrap fence around the bottom of the stairs, because then you've got the 5 foot fence that's down at the bottom. Because I think the issue that I'm a little uncomfortable with here is that if you either have to physically put that stair guard on and lock it, or else you'll have the stair that will be open, and anyone climbing the stair will only reach a 3 foot high fence. And no longer satisfies our 5 foot high fence requirement at the top of the stairs. And so it's a little bit, I mean, I understand it's unlikely that a kid is going to try to climb over that 3 foot fence, but I think you want to err on the side of being extra safe with these things, which is why the ordinance was written the way it was initially, with the 5 foot fence all the way around and the 4 foot distance between the fence and the pool so someone doesn't accidentally jump over and into the pool, and the self-latching and all the rest. So I think we want to make this so that it's as foolproof as possible for parents who are running back and forth between the house and they're taking some kids in and on the rest. I'm just trying to think of how it would be if I had a pool like that in my backyard, and how easy it would be to forget to throw the stair guard on or to forget to manually lock a gate or something like that.
So based on what you've written, the fencing that goes around it, do you believe there's sufficient space, or you need more space between the fence and the actual water?
I think with this particular style and design, there's no way you can have certainly that 4 foot buffer. I don't think we'd want to require that. And I think just visually, for anyone who happens to be in that yard, these are going to be very clearly pools. And whereas if it was just a 5 foot fence and you happen to be on the outside of the fence, you wouldn't know whether there's a pool on the other side of it or not, which is why you have the 4 foot buffer. So I'm a little bit more comfortable with the fact we don't have the 4 foot buffer, but I want to make sure those gates are a good height. Now, the one thing, again, and I don't know enough about the technology here on that step, when you have the step guard, I mean, if it was a step guard that that it was spring loaded, that you had to pull down and then step on to climb up, and it automatically came back up, which I think is unlikely, then you would satisfy the automatic portion of it. But if it's something where you have to physically carry a stair guard and put it on and lock it, otherwise you don't have, you have free access up and down the stairs, then I think it becomes a little bit more of an issue. Now, again, if I was to say where I'm willing to compromise a little bit, if you still just have an unguarded stair and you go to the top of the stair and there's a 3-foot high gate, and that gate is self-locking, self-latching, self-closing, all that automatic stuff, then I think it might be a little bit more comfortable because you have to actually go up the stairs and get to it. And I could see that being a little bit more secure than otherwise.
Any commissioners have any thoughts or questions? So are you suggesting that we remove that 4-foot language?
The
Or do you
4-foot.
make an exception based on the style?
Yeah, in the 4-foot buffer is not included in the pair or the sentence that refers to the above ground pool, at least in either version, in Michael's or in mine. It doesn't require, it just says that having that, the combination of the sidewall of the pool and the top rail fence, as long as that total distance is 5 foot, then you meet the fencing requirement. And so we're already in the language that's been presented, not requiring the 4-foot buffer. But I just wanted you guys to be aware of that and make sure you're all comfortable with that exclusion on these above ground pools. And then the way I've written it such that you have to have a 5-foot high gate on accessing those above ground pools, which would require either having a 5-foot high fence and gate at the top of the stairs or requiring a 5-foot high fence and gate at the bottom of the stairs. And again, we'd have to talk to the person who submitted this particular above ground pool option to see how difficult that might be to require.
So I would say if the commissioners agree with this conceptually, we could have that conversation with the applicant and then maybe run it past the city attorney if we haven't already done that, Rodney, and make sure that he feels that we've captured the intent in the language.
We can certainly open up the discussion with Mr. Malling and communicate the intent that we're hearing tonight.
Okay. Any other thoughts from the commissioners? Otherwise, we'll bring this one back next month.
No, I agree with this. I like the extra considerations for safety on this one.
I agree as well, and I would actually like to thank Commissioner Barman for doing the extra work.
No problem.
All right, I don't know if we need to really take action on it then to postpone it, or we just carry it over, whatever you guys would like to do.
If you need a motion, I'd move to postpone it till the next meeting.
That's fine. Is there a second?
I'll second.
I think I heard Robinson first. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. That carries, so we'll see that at the next meeting. Item number 6, proposed zoning ordinance amendment to repeal section 78-205, parent 12, and all references to group developments. We have this posted for a public hearing. Do you want to give some background, Rodney?
Yeah, so staff has come across this kind of conflicting language within our code. As you know, we bring things to the commission as those things are brought to our attention. This is one that it talks about group development in a number of different sections, But when you look at really the substance of what group development, the only thing it's regulating is really pretty minor items. So my cover memo or our cover memo kind of outlined, it really only focuses on waste bin accommodations, building position on a site, and then pedestrian and bicycle safety on the owned site. I think you'll recognize we're really doing those as part of site plans or PD plans or conditional use permit applications. I really don't, I think it adds more confusion than it does clarity. And the reference here, we don't feel is necessary to still accomplish evaluation of these items because they're evaluated as part of other processes.
Any questions or comments from commissioners before we go into public hearing? All right, hearing none, we'll close the regular meeting and we'll reopen for the public hearing. I didn't have anyone contact us ahead of time, but if there's anyone on the call that would wish to speak to this topic at the public hearing, now would be the time to do it. And I'm hearing none, so we'll close the public hearing, reopen for our regular business. We're looking for a recommendation to council. I believe there is a resolution in the packet.
I have one question for Rodney before I'm comfortable making a recommendation.
Yep.
And that is the one thing I don't know if there's somewhere else in the instructions to Plan Commission in terms of reviewing site plans that refers to this issue of building separation on a site. Because I didn't really think, I agree with you. For clarity purposes, I think the majority of this can just go.
Yeah.
But when I'm looking at site plans that have multiple buildings, I don't know if in the past I've thought about the potential that someone might someday come and say, well, I'd like to split this lot in parcels and have each of these two buildings on a separate parcel, and then start thinking about whether the buildings were far enough apart that we now have satisfied the lot line setback requirements. And so I don't know if there's somewhere else in the ordinance that we could make some sort of small note to think about that, or if it's even important to require that. You know, if two buildings are so close together, then later you split the property and then they're too close.
So we have that conversation with people when they come to us with a multiple building site, because they have to go through a conditional use permit process for multiple buildings on the same site. I don't know if there's specific reference to it outside of this group development, but on the flip side, they might not be able to receive the split, if you will, if they can't comply with the setback requirements. So it's part of this where we counsel them or give them information, the iterative process that they come to us and say, we're looking at doing this. We remind them of that. So they may be creating challenges for themselves down the road or a future landowner. But nonetheless, it is brought to their attention and it is part of the discussion as part of a CUP or PD process.
Okay, so it's formally part of the staff conversation that you guys are aware with, and then whether or not it's triggered enough that us as Plan Commission members will realize that that's kind of on our.
Yeah, the burden falls on the owner, but we do discuss it with them during the process when they come to us and say, here's what we're looking at doing.
Good. Well, then I would move to recommend that under zoning code section 78-205-12 and all ordinance references to a group development be repealed.
Sure, second.
I'll second that.
A second by Schumacher. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. That'll be at the council. Item 7 is a request by Phil Harrison to discuss the regulations for flags and banners used for commercial signage. And I know Mr. Harrison is logged in here for this meeting. So, and you also had send in a request to speak. So if we have any questions, or if he has any, you can feel free to let us know and we'll recognize you. Can you give us some background on this, Rodney?
Yeah, so there are regulations that prohibit signage of certain types within the city and in certain locations. The feather flag type signage is not allowed within the city. The only place it's actually allowed explicitly is in the downtown district, and it's really limited. It's really only supposed to be to say open, and it's supposed to be for certain days. So that's the limitation that was placed on that type of signage, dating back to at least '09. And we believe that the chamber had an initiative that tried to get downtown businesses open on weekends more, and to highlight that specifically. And in doing so, they focused on creating the regulations for the downtown district. Some of the commissioners who might not have been around in '09, there certainly was a commission and council that was really stringent on trying to regulate signage, and that there was a concern about sign clutter and creating an environment where there's more signage than what they believed was necessary. And so I think that's kind of lingers today. And you'll recognize many communities deal with signs differently. Each community deals with them differently. Sandwich board signs, for example, are usually a pedestrian-oriented sign, and they're in the downtown corridor, which it's really geared for that pedestrian activity in that area. Certainly can talk about the specifics if we'd like. And I know that Mr. Harrison had some signage up in the right of way out with his temporary use related to the facility out in the pick and save lot. And then there was a restriction on what type of signage he could have. And so I think that's what brings us here to talk about, is there interest in changing some of that sign regulation?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harrison, is there anything you'd like to add at this point?
Yeah, so again, my name is Phil Harrison. I have with me, for those who are able to view, my fiance, Morgan Elliott. We are the co-owners. We both own together 100% of Rise and Grind Coffee, the mobile coffee cart that has been operating in the Pick and Save parking lot for the last few months. We've lived in the Stoughton community now for a little over 2 years. And in that time of a little over 2 years in frequenting different areas of the community, I had noticed many different feather flag type signage and different types of banners during that time. So I guess when I had originally invested in some flag signage for my business and put them up, I was unaware that that was not allowed. As soon as Mr. Stacy notified me that they were not allowed, we removed them right away. We're not trying to make any enemies by any means with anyone. We're trying to understand that the viewpoint of trying to reduce sign clutter and trying to keep the city of Stoughton aesthetically pleasing for its residents and its visitors. We 100% agree with that. We just feel that the current regulations may be a little over stringent compared to the type of signage that is more popular and readily available for businesses in 2020 versus maybe in 2009. The fact that these types of signs are specifically designed into the historic business district of downtown Stoughton, as well as specific exemptions to allow businesses of those locations within the community to use this sort of signage to draw interest and attention to their location and services they may or may not be offering. Why is it not acceptable to other locations within the community? And is there any way that we can potentially get some of that verbiage changed and a little more clear, where a feather flag type thing isn't necessarily under the exact same guidelines as a temporary banner created by Pepsi and it's hung on 2 fence stakes next to the road, because those are special event temporary things that we totally understand, but don't necessarily need to be treated the exact same way. And so we're just trying to see what we can do to come to a resolution with the community of Stoughton, the city, and try to advertise for our business a little bit more clearly. We know that the signs and the flags that we had were working and were drawing attention to us based off of public comment, both solicited and unsolicited, of that we should have some sort of a flag or something to draw attention to us, including the day that we were notified that by Mr. Stacy we couldn't have them. We had an unsolicited post on one of our Facebook posts that said, and I quote, "I had your coffee last week after seeing those coffee flags. It was delicious. Thank you," end quote. So to know on the exact same day that I'm being told I cannot use this advertising tactic, I also am getting positive feedback that it's working, but yet there's no sign of it actually harming anyone or causing a distraction or a hindrance to anyone. How do we move on from this to be able to allow more local Stoughton businesses to try to thrive, especially right now in a time where we've got a lot of local businesses that are dropping like flies? And I think that kind of sums up my comment, unless anybody has questions for either myself or Morgan.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions or comments from commissioners?
Mayor, this is Todd. You'll have to let me know how I should approach my involvement in this, because I have a conflict of interest, because I actually have gone to the city and requested feather flags for the sweet shop, because I also believe that they can be very valuable to draw attention to business, particularly the businesses that are set back, like the coffee stand, as well as the way the sweet shop sets back. And I've been in this business for a long time, and I'm all for reducing sign clutter. But I do have the option as a property owner of going to the city and actually putting up a big tower sign or some other sign. Those are allowed, big, expensive, permanent signs, but considering the economic times and budgets, that's just not feasible for a lot of businesses to put these major investments in signage. And those feather flags, in a lot of ways, do add visual interest in the same way that communities put the pole banners on telephone poles and light poles, just to add color and interest, so long as it's something that isn't has a lot of text. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I have opinions on this, and I have a personal interest in it. But as a commission member, Mayor, you'll have to let me know whether I have to recuse myself or stay out of it, or if I can be part of the discussion but just not vote. You'd have to let me know. Although I don't think anything's up for a vote today. It's more just a conversation.
And if I might add to what he just mentioned of the value to be able to add to the businesses, I just want to be clear as well that there is in the stipulation in the exemption for the historic business district, specifically for if a flag or a signage of that sort becomes tattered or illegible and is no longer visually pleasing, that they are required to move it. And we are 100% on board with that as well, because we agree with wanting the city and the community of Stoughton to be aesthetically pleasing. So we don't want tattered, ratty flags either. And we just think that there can be some more consideration to ways that it can be handled other than just flat out barring.
Okay. Yeah, as far as the conflict, Commissioner Barman, I guess I'd have to talk to the city attorney about that. For the sake of discussion here, you're not making the request, so I think it's okay for now. But I can certainly have that conversation if this, goes deeper. Do any of the commissioners have any thoughts or questions about this topic?
This is Tom Seltzer. I might have just this thought that while certainly Mr. Barman's comments are welcome, maybe he should recuse himself from the actual voting, since he's interested in he has some of the same interests. So I just that would be one way that that's commonly resolved.
All right, thank you. And I don't know if it's not really on here as an action item tonight, so I think we're good. I think what we're looking for as the staff is some direction, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rodney, so we know, what we can bring back or stay the status quo, whatever the commissioners want to recommend, we're okay with, but we would like some direction.
Certainly direction is what's being requested. We need to understand if there's interest in trying to move forward some regulation changes, and if so, what they look like, whether feather flags would be allowed, how many would be allowed, where they'd be allowed, if they're in the right of way or not. If once you get into the right of way, there's a whole different set of issues that have to be overcome. But are we just talking feather flags? Are we talking specific banners? And then if you're talking about placement in conjunction with a temporary use, is there additional standards or quantities? When you look at the full parcel as a whole, how do those factor into that evaluation as well?
All right,
Yes,
I'm not
please.
hearing anything from the commissioners. The other thing we'd have to take into consideration is, freedom of speech and those kind of issues. I know the city attorney brings that up often when we're talking signage. So if we're going to expand it, certainly, we may or not be able to really dictate what would be on the signage. We could have that conversation with the city attorney if there's something specifically that you'd like to see, whether I think Mr. Harrison said open is allowed. I don't know if we can go beyond that or how specific we need to be. I'm not even sure what it says on your sign currently.
The signs that we had, one said coffee and one said espresso. I believe that the other conversation that I've had with Mr. Stacy, Mr. Shield, Alderman Hiley, who has been extremely helpful with some of the conversations related to this, that it was kind of intended more to show businesses open in the business district on weekends. And there is a limitation in the exemption of the zoning ordinance on size for those downtown businesses. I have yet to read the exact line of specific days of the week, but I have definitely not read all of the codes, so it may very well be there. They are limited to a certain amount of square feet, and it's specifically mentioned of being attached at the pole at the top and the bottom of a style flag, and some verbiage with that. But I guess that's what we are looking for, is some direction of how this can be approached, and if there is possibility of some change in verbiage or structure of the ordinances, we'd be more than willing to help contribute to that, and give some input on that, as well as, since I have spent a lot of time reading the signage ordinance code, it's not exactly cut and dry.
So just it sounds like you guys are comfortable with me just sharing a few thoughts, which I'll do now. I think sandwich board signs, based on size and the fact that they typically have more text, sandwich board signs, which are also part of this discussion, because they're allowed in the downtown and not allowed anywhere else. And I had wanted to have them out in front of our business as well. But I can see it's pretty easy to make the argument that sandwich board signs are better for pedestrians who can look at that detail. But I think it's harder to make a case for that the downtown needs feather flags for pedestrians, because I think that's more for. And if you're looking to have traffic driving by downtown be able to know that downtown's open, then we can make the same case for businesses outside the downtown. And so, and I think you could also look at, I like in the examples that are provided in our packet, the way Sun Prairie lays it out in terms of a specific quantity of signs that would be allowed per street frontage or per lot. I think makes a lot of sense to have one or two, rather than, having each business trying to put 12 of them out to outshout the neighbors. And you could even, I think, connect this to whether or not might be a substitute or be judged in the same conversation with other signs that might be near the right of way. Allowed to put up a monument sign that's fixed and expensive. Why can't I put up a feather flag in the same location that would have just say Stoughton Sweet Shop on it, instead of having to invest in a monument sign, for example? As much as I want the monument sign and all the rest, you could evaluate in terms of quantity and square footage with other signage that might be along that frontage. So that would help with any kind of sign clutter issues as well.
Any other comments? I had a question, Rodney, on these examples that you gave for Sun Prairie, for example. Is there a fee associated, do you know, with these types of signs, or are these exempt?
I think the Sun Prairie ones, there was not a fee. They're exempt, I believe, for the few that they allow there. For the examples they allow here, there's no permit required.
Okay, so that means there's no fee required as well.
That'd be my understanding, yes.
Okay, so I guess I'm trying to get a flavor from the group on whether or not, we should be more like Oregon or more like Sun Prairie.
I mean, I'd certainly like to pursue I haven't pursued a little bit further. I'm unclear in the 2009 wording of it, if that was meant just for all signage so that we don't have a cluttery looking downtown area or Main Street area, or whether it was specifically aimed at these feather signs or not. So I think if this is kind of becoming a little bit more commonplace advertisement for businesses, then I think we should at least consider accommodating what this more common advertising piece would be.
Any thoughts from other commissioners? Agree or disagree with Alder Schumacher?
I agree with Brad Shoemaker.
Yeah, I
I'd like
agree as well. Sorry, Tom. Are you done? Okay, yeah, I agree as well. I'm just wondering if maybe instead of the city of Sun Prairie, where they say they allow 3 wave banners per lot without really defining whether that's just per lot or per business, something more that defined whether if it was, 1 flag per business in that lot, because I know that there's, a strip mall situation or something like that where, if you numerous flags per business or something like that. So if we had 1 per business in I don't know about the measurement, the feet of frontage particularly, and then like you mentioned earlier, Mayor, defining whether we can have mandate, whether it just is a flag sign that says, or feather sign that simply says open. Because I think, essentially you're trying to attract attention to that business. And I think an open flag goes a pretty fair way to doing that. And, once someone's attention is drawn to that flag or that business, then they can discern what's taking place there, or, what the business is open for.
Okay. And I think we heard from everyone except for Alder Majewski. Do you have any thoughts on this one? Guess I'm not hearing them. So it sounds like what I'm hearing is you want us to work on something that's potentially similar to Sun Prairie. And then we can talk to the city attorney and see if they have any other components that they think we need to have included. You know, we bring it back. I guess part of my concern is do this. I mean, we're looking at probably not getting something approved until pretty close to the first of the year, which isn't really going to help the Harrisons right now. So I'm not really sure what to do about that, but we could certainly, you know, proceed and bring something together for the next meeting.
As staff, I assume I'd be the one helping put whatever together, and I don't know that I got a whole lot of guidance other than support for some type of feather flags. I'll just throw out a couple of examples. If you were to allow 3 per lot, and if that includes the downtown district, you potentially could have 3 of them in front of a 22-foot lineal frontage parcel. Or if you allow 1 per business, even in the downtown district, sometimes you have multiple businesses within that 22 feet. I'm not trying to pick it apart. I'm just trying to lay out some of the challenges that we'll have as staff to prepare, and understanding the intent of the commissioners is going to be helpful so that we can put something together. You know, when we look at 200 feet of frontage, you know, the Pick and Save parcel probably has about 200 feet of frontage, I'm guessing. The Tractor Supply might have 300 or 400 feet there. But if you're allowing 3 there and 1 for every 200 feet extra, is that per business or is that per, you know, because you might have different entities within that business, whether it's the banking entity within, not Pick and Save, but you might have multiple entities within a property that large as well.
I think we would probably maybe want to, looking again at Sun Prairie, but simplify it to just have 1 wave banner per lot, period. And if there are multiple businesses like we have downtown, if there's a business on the main floor and another business on the second floor, they would, you know, if we're sticking with just an open banner or an open feather flag, then it would signify the people would have to discern which business it is that the open sign applies to. Another thing I was just thinking of is having the flag sign displayed only when the business is open. Making sure that that is in there as well. So when they are closed, they take the flag down. I don't know if that,
I think removal of the flag sign or the feather flag when the business is closed, I think that's reasonable. I think looking at, for example, in the ordinance that's already on the books for downtown, and I didn't find the feather flag portion here, but I did find the sandwich board sign in that ordinance. It says no more than 1 such sign permitted per business. And so even already downtown, if you had 4 businesses in 1 building, you could have 4 sandwich boards outside of that same building. I mean, I don't know if we're having issues or problems with that, but I could see limiting it to 1 feather flag per building, but also maybe per street front. So like for a corner property, that's trying to not only let people know on Main Street, but also on the side street that they're open. I could see having 1 for each, you know, street facing side of the building as an option. But I don't think you need much more than 1, I don't think, per business, or in a lot of cases per building. I think, and again, having it go back inside at night makes sense. I think we could look at the way the downtown is treated the number of feather flags up to this point, to see how that wording was. I do think it's problematic for businesses like the ones here that are being discussed that only allow to have a permit and have it be a 30-day permit, because then you're constantly having to go back to the city and do paperwork. And if all it is an open sign, then every 30 days, we got to go in and make sure our permit's renewed to have that open sign back out. So I think it's better to have a longer period versus having something that has to be re-upped every 30 or 45 days.
All right, any other thoughts, or was that helpful, Rodney?
It provides a starting point. But it is certainly, Todd, you mentioned one per building, and then you also mentioned one per business. So, so there's still some interpretation we're going to have to be making as staff to try to vet that out and get something back to you. And in Mr. Harrison's situation, how are you suggesting we deal with temporary uses? Are we still looking at as one per business or one per lot?
I would think that if we were going to allow a temporary until we come up with something that is a more permanent wording or permanent fix, that potentially allowing a one single feather flag sign per business on a temporary basis. That's works.
You mean to run with a temporary use permit or to run with a mobile vending? Because the temporary situation, we'd have to kind of codify that anyhow, but I heard what you were talking about is one per business, focusing on one per business.
Yeah, I think one per business to accommodate those folks. I guess I wasn't even thinking about the mobile aspect.
Because that's the next item on the agenda. We might talk about that a little more deeply when we talk about the mobile vending.
Well, it sounds like we have something to start with. We'll have to do some additional research and maybe the city attorney can bring some insight on his experience and bring something back at the next meeting. Does that sound reasonable, or is there anything else you want us to check? Or you can always, shoot us an email or give us a call if you wake up in the middle of the night and you think of something.
Mayor,
Yes.
I'm finally back. I was having audio problems. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
You asked me a question. I did have some input.
Excellent.
The things that I'm seeing is I think more density of feather flags, like in the downtown area, whatever, that could be distracting if you get those businesses are right next to each other. I can just see the Main Street lined with them. That's part of it. So I'd like to see how we can somehow keep things from getting too cluttered, so they are effective when they are being used. And then the second thing is though in the downtown, they're allowed to be in the right of way because there is no real private property outside the storefront. In the case of where you have Mr. Harrison's business, would they be allowed in the right of way? I would hope not. Did you get any of that?
I'm writing it down. Yeah, thank you.
I can't tell. My audio is popping in and out. So anyway.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And what makes this unique is they're operating a cart in a big parking lot. So
Right.
really the spacing isn't as much of an issue for them, but we have to draft something that is more universal.
I also don't want to see those feather boards or feather flags or whatever you want to call them. I don't want to see them out in the right of way.
Got
And
it.
I don't believe that's their intent either.
I understand that, but I can see where if it's not addressed, where it could become a problem.
I agree.
Speaking directly to our specific situation at the Pick and Save parking lot, as far as the right of way for Highway 51 there, does that stop at the sidewalk or does it stop at the beginning of the parking lot where the little bit of landscaping between the sidewalk and the parking lot? Is that private property or is that the right of way? Because I feel like there would not be a hindrance on the parking lot side of the sidewalk there. Away from the road still, but definitely agree that they should not be out between the sidewalk and the road, as that could be too much of a distraction for drivers and the like, and we don't want to create a safety issue.
Generally, the sidewalk's in the public right of way, and the area behind the sidewalk is generally private property.
So we weren't. All right.
All right, anything else on this one?
Oh,
All right, so we'll get to work on this one, and then item number 8 is also, the Harrisons have some interest in this one as well. And that's the potential zoning code amendments to allow the mobile food vending on private property. This one we were working on it at CACP. Seems like going on a couple of years now in anticipation of the future of food carts being more common. And, you know, we took some sample ordinances that were out there and we kind of, you know, cut and pasted some components of it. And then we kind of reached a point with the attorney because we were regulating zoning. Some of them were being allowed through special events, which goes through public safety. So the police chief and clerk were involved. Some of them were in our park. So Park and Rec were facilitating the permits. And then we also felt there may be some food carts that just want to set up wherever. And I think we've kind of come to the conclusion that it might be best to try to just manage that into the zoning, because then it will at least go to one-stop shop unless it was under a special event. And I think that's why it's landed here tonight. Did I miss anything, Rodney?
oh, I think you captured it well.
So here it is. And I know Rodney had put together some discussion points, which are on the screen. And for Tom, if you can't see them, we can go through them one by one for you.
No, I've got visual. My audio is messed up.
Oh, okay. So I think that's what we're looking for, is some direction on some of these discussion points, unless you guys think we're just totally going in the wrong direction. So my understanding is, for the Harrisons, they did come through zoning. Is that correct, Rodney?
They're operating under a temporary use permit that was issued to them till the end of the year.
So the first item for discussion is define temporary use. And I think currently it's 180 days a year. I think the Harrisons would like to see it longer than that. They suggested that maybe year round, but if it's year round, then it's not exactly temporary. So I'm not really sure how we would handle that. So I guess the question is 180 days seem like a temporary number, or should we adjust that?
I think it's reasonable. I mean, 180 days is what, half a year? basically.
Yep. 6 months,
I mean,
basically.
I believe that's reasonable. I mean, that is a temp. To me, actually, I think temporary is more like around 90 days, but that's just me.
Anybody else have any thoughts about that?
No, I agree with Tom's assessment on that. I think somewhere between 90 and 180 days is reasonable for temporary use for certain.
Yeah, but I think the question here is whether we are going to treat these food trucks or food carts as a temporary use or not. Because I think that their goal as entrepreneurs and small businesses are to be able to make an income every day of the year. It's like, asking downtown businesses to only stay open 90 days and then the rest of the year stay closed. It's actually it's now a business model that's out there, and there are communities that are trying to accommodate this business model for entrepreneurs. I think part of the challenge the communities have is finding ideal locations for these food trucks and food cart businesses within the overall land use development within the community, that it's not just random or spotty or creates other kinds of conflicts. So I think it's a decision here of whether we're treating those kinds of business formats as something we want to accommodate within the community, and then they probably shouldn't be temporary uses, or else we're just considering them to be temporary because we don't want to support them as entrepreneurs.
I know that in CACP, when we were looking at this, we were looking at it as an annualized license, something akin to the like dog licenses or when people are getting their chicken coop licenses and things like that. We're thinking of running them through the clerk's office that way. It created a little bit more in the way of paperwork for that side of things too. But regardless, this effort is gonna make some paperwork for somebody.
Yeah, and I think that, where I struggled at CACP and even now is, we certainly want to support, a small business, but we also, have other businesses that are bricks and mortar. And there's a concern on, the bricks and mortar and whether or not this creates a level playing field for a business that is paying property taxes on a building and, has a larger investment. And so I think those are some of the concerns that, we've been talking about at the committees and then internally is, how do we want to handle that?
I agree with the mayor. Those were some of my concerns, and just an observation, a cart has wheels on it, they move. So again, giving them a full year license to sit in one spot that's why they have wheels on them. They need to move occasionally. That's temporary.
If I may, as a mobile cart owner, obviously, the county of Dane County requires with the health department for any mobile food or beverage establishment that deals with consumables that operates within the county to be licensed and registered with them and inspected by them, which is also an annual permit that is separate from a specific downtown Madison permit. If you wanted to say operate on the square, it's just to operate in the within the county and make sure that the businesses are following the health and safety guidelines. Since that's an annual permit, I guess I feel as a business owner in this sense that maybe the city of Stoughton could still do an annual permit as being able to operate within the city limits of Stoughton, provided they have the proper approval of the private property owner in that sense, and leaving a little bit of it up more to the individual property owners of if they are even willing to negotiate with a cart to want to operate in their lot. I know when we were first beginning to operate in town here and looking for a location, not everybody wants a cart to park in their lot and operate if they have decent traffic flow to their business already. To go along with that, being mobile, yes, we can move. But as an entrepreneur, we are doing it this route because it is less of an overhead investment with a long-term goal of wanting to open a brick and mortar shop here in the Stoughton community. So not all of the mobile cart owners are necessarily just looking for a one-stop shop, a weekend here, a weekend there, or necessarily planning on being a cart for forever. We would very much love to open a brick and mortar shop here in Stoughton, and provide that more services to the community with that, with spaces for people to meet and all of that sort of thing, and the atmosphere for people to have a place to go. But that investment is 5 to 6 times as much as getting into a mobile operation there. So we chose to go the mobile operation route because of that less initial capital required. Again, knowing that with our economy the way it is as of right now and moving forward, does Stoughton want to accept these businesses and help them thrive and grow and potentially create different things that can become very thriving brick and mortar locations and options for the community? Or are they more concerned about the people who want to invest or have the money to invest in a brick and mortar up front, and not help give that opportunity to the little guys who are trying to start small with what they're able to do in the beginning?
He's asleep.
Well, Mayor, maybe I could just highlight the fact, what we're trying to do is regulate the standards for when they are placed on private property. The regulations don't allow them to be in the public right of way, to have mobile vending or mobile food vending within the public right of way. Just like it was mentioned, the city of Madison probably utilizes the zoning standard for their on-site, while the county has the licensing to say, yep, you're operating to meet the health standards. I think that's probably why the community affairs in Stoughton decided they didn't need to have a separate local license for that, because that's already covered under the countywide umbrella. But local regulation of on private property, that's what zoning does. So I think we have to establish what the standards are, and that's really what we're trying to do as part of the commissioner's evaluation and guidance tonight.
And so what I've heard so far is the temporary use of 180 days is appropriate. That's one thing I heard. Unless anybody else has comments on that, we can move to the next one.
I mean, I guess I don't know exactly how Madison does it. I'm thinking I'm trying to recall what I've read about it, is that I think somebody applies for a spot to have their cart at the same spot every day and I don't know if they do it for a year, and then they renew, and there's like sort of a lottery type system, or I forget exactly how they do it. So it's sort of a combination. It's permanent for a year instead of temporary for 6 months, if that makes sense. But if, for example, somebody is just wants to be in the same place, like in the Pick and Save parking lot, and operating there every day for 365 days, then that's not temporary status. That's sort of permanent annually, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think we'd have to do something else to accommodate that, because that's definitely not temporary use. And that really gets back to the philosophy of, do we want to try to support and nurture the startup businesses? Or how do we balance that against those that had invested in a building and might foresee this, as competition? And, that's a difficult answer. I think that's one that we're gonna have to chew on a little bit unless, somebody has it figured out, because I sure don't. Those are,
Well, I think it's a slippery slope when you start talking about competition, because then how do you can start making arguments that, well, we got one business that is bought or leasing a 5,000 square foot building, so we should give them preference over a business that's renting or leasing a 500 square foot building, because they have more real estate and they're paying more taxes. And so I think what you're trying to do is support business and entrepreneurs within the community, and then, give everyone opportunity. And it's usually, there's certain business formats and certain business models that work better out of a cart or a truck, and there's other ones that work better out of a storefront. And they don't always translate, that you start in a truck and then later go to a storefront. It's just some things work better in one format or the other. And I think there are communities that we can look at for ordinances as examples. Portland has been kind of a national model for food truck and food cart ordinances, because they've actually worked hard to manage and support that industry. Madison, I believe, has a separate ordinance or section of the ordinance that deals with the food carts. And I don't know if they've gotten into the food trucks yet. I think part of it is a community we can look at, not necessarily just only looking at it from the perspective of permitting the business, but looking at actually approving the site as part of site plans and land use planning and zoning, in the sense that maybe we need to look at, say, approving, pick and say, a parking lot or a portion of it as a place where we're supporting food carts or food trucks. Or maybe there's another place in town. A lot of communities look at the critical mass of having a collection of food trucks that are proximate to each other, or a collection of food carts. So it's almost like the same kind of atmosphere you get at special events, supported within an area of the community, but more on a regular basis, because it actually creates a really neat environment for customers and residents of the community. So I think in some ways we have to kind of look at this more broad reaching rather than a case by case. And again, I'll admit, and I'll bring up the fact that this, after the farmer's market in the Dollar General parking lot just closed this last Friday, one of the food truck vendors came and talked to me about parking in my lot. So I think it's something where there's interest out there, and I think there's something where, there's a need to have, some clear instructions for property owners who are approached and for business owners who want to do it.
okay. The bullet point number 2 talks about the sign ordinance and what type of signage should be allowed, and we touched on that a little bit earlier. Are there any additional thoughts about that?
Can you move that up on the so we can read that on our screens? I can't.
So it says currently uses can have 2 square foot signage placed on private property. Signage on a vehicle is not typically regulated. So basically, if they have signage on the vehicle, that's fine. And then if it's a temporary use, which currently I think that's all we have, which, may be subject to change, they can have a 2 square foot signage placed around the property. And I don't know if if the feather flags are considered 2 feet or what those are considered as far as size.
But currently they're not allowed.
Okay,
Other flags currently are just not allowed.
If they
Right.
were allowed, would they meet that requirement, or are they
They would
bigger
be-
than that?
They would be bigger than 2 square foot. They would be more like a foot by 6 to 10 feet, depending on how they're set up. So they wouldn't meet that square footage requirement. And again, I think, and I'll just bring this up again, if we start looking at trying to site plan locations, then I think you can, this signage issue might be better dealt with as you think about location and placement of the trucks or the carts versus just, because I think it's more of an issue of, if someone, how a 2 square foot sign is going to work, or any other kind of sign is going to work, is going to vary a lot based on how you're accommodating these trucks or carts within the community or where you're doing it.
Yeah, I think, one of the struggles we have is, do we want to regulate this or not? If we're going to, that takes staff time to do that. And quite frankly, the permit really doesn't begin to cover the cost of our staff time, much less the attorney time that would need to be to draft this ordinance. So, that's where it gets really difficult, where we want to be able to support the startups, but we don't want to really, invest, tons of money into it, because we're not going to recoup it through our fees. So I think we can maybe look at some examples of other communities and what they're doing for signage. I don't know if you've been able to do that yet, Rodney.
I think our draft language outlines some stuff in here. But certainly you'd have to have some type of signage allowance, you'd think.
Okay. Any more thoughts on the signage? And then the third bullet point is, should a special event license by the city also be required to get a zoning permit? So currently we don't do that, right? Is that what you're saying, Rodney?
Correct. So for example, when we have coffee break days or setting of Mai, or even Rotary Park, the events that the Opera House Board does there, they're licensed under a special event license, and zoning regulations don't apply to those, or the mobile food vending would be exempt for, it'd be allowed, but under that special event licensing as currently drafted.
And, I've been okay with that in the past, simply because the organizer really does all the work, and they collect all the money from the vendors, and that's part of what helps them pay for the event. And as far as I know, we haven't really had any issues at public safety with the chief or even the clerk's office of getting the maps, and really, they basically have to put together a site plan to do that anyway. So I'm not really sure, what the rationale would be as far as why we would need to have a zoning permit. I guess I haven't really thought into that.
Currently, as drafted, it allows it under the special event license in this zoning code draft. So we wouldn't have further regulation of it unless there's desire to do so.
I don't know if there is from an administrative end, unless there's, an advantage or a reason that we should consider doing that. And I know at CACP, Brett, one of the things I heard is we really didn't want to be having multiple fees and going from one department for one and another department to another.
No, I think that we kind of ruled that out because it would start to get really confusing as far as who's paid what, when, and to whom.
And that's kind of how we landed here. We figured it would either be a zoning issue or it would be a special event license, and it would be really easy for staff to understand based on the request which way to go with that.
Can you remind me on special event licenses, are there set time frames or time limits for the length of a special event? I mean, I'll just give you an example, a really strange example. Let's say Pick and Save applied for an annual special event license for having essentially a special event within their parking lot that would feature food trucks or push carts. And, or special events limited to a week or 2 weeks, or do they have to specify dates?
I think it's limited to a few days as currently written. We could look at that because it's typically for a weekend event or set in Maya where it's 3 or 4 days. We could certainly look at that if there's a desire, but most of the special events, just the name of it would indicate that it's certainly something less than a temporary use.
Well, I know that like the farmer's market at the Dollar General, I think they applied to the city as a special event permit. Is that correct? Or how did that work with a season-long farmer's market? Or the one that was typically downtown next to City Hall? Is that a season-long special event permit?
Yeah, I believe they do, and they have to specify the dates.
They have to provide insurance and other things related to the special event as well.
Okay. This is not an easy thing, just as a first blush reading of what's been provided in our packet, I think it's a little bit hard to follow, and I think there's probably ways that I would hope it could be simplified, not only for staff in terms of their review, but also for anyone looking to apply. I think you would hope that this could be something that could be a little bit more straightforward and clean, no matter how we decide.
I can tell you it took a fair amount of effort just to get to this point.
Yeah, we had a long document to begin with, and then we pared it down. Then we added things back, and it was a lot of back and forth, and that was over, like Mayor said, like more than a year. So it's not easy because it falls into a different category or one that's not well characterized by any of the categories that we have.
Yeah, no, I certainly understand that. I just know, you can get in the weeds in terms of defining what mobile food vending is. Is it only when you're processing the food, like you have a kitchen in the food cart or the food truck, or if I'm just selling vegetables where I'm not processing it, is that considered mobile food vending? Because early on in this draft, there's a section that just says examples of this land use include but not limited to seasonal garden sales, fireworks sales, vegetable and fruit sales, and Christmas trees. So those are all just kind of grab and go retail items where you're not having someone cooking or processing. But then we have another whole section on mobile food vending that talks about the fact that you've got food production and processing. And is it really, from a city's perspective, does it matter whether they're just selling, raw vegetables or whether they're processing food in it from a signage and a land use and a location perspective and a permitting perspective? I don't know, since Dane County is already having to permit the food aspect, the kitchen aspect of it, I don't see where you would really need to separate those two into separate categories and have a whole section for it.
Yeah, I think the details of how they do what they're doing isn't completely relevant as long as they have the Dane County Health seal of approval on that. It's just something that I don't think we need to get into about that if it's already covered someplace else.
So I think what we were trying to do is separate a special events versus a temporary use. I think that's why it's split out.
Right, but we already said that that's going to be covered by a special event permit, and they won't have to separately satisfy this temporary use permit. Because I don't think we currently require each vendor at a special event to also get a temporary vendor's permit, do we? Aren't they covered by the special event?
That's correct.
Any other thoughts or anything that we missed that you think we should take into consideration before we come back with this the next time? We could certainly have, one of the attorneys join us if you think that would be helpful. Schneider has been the one working on this.
I think that would be good because I remember that was always kind of we'd come up with ideas and then Matt would kind of shoot a lot of them down or modify these sorts of things. So maybe if we had Rachel as to guide through the decisions or what the rationale behind certain language is in the document.
Okay. I guess we can do that. And there again, if there's something else that you think needs to be taken into consideration, if you want to shoot us an email or give us a call, so we can have Rachel do some research on it before the next meeting, that would be great.
I know it's a tough one to try and get a wrap around completely. It shouldn't be that difficult, but it seems to be more difficult than it is.
And the main thing for us is, we really just kind of want to know where they're at. So if there is an issue, whether it's a traffic issue or, there's a disturbance or whatever, we at least have something on record that we know they're there and who is there. So if we have to, talk to Dane County, or if for some reason the PD has to get involved, we at least know, who's on site and that they were given permission to be there. It just makes it a lot easier to facilitate something if it were ever to occur. Hopefully it wouldn't. But strange things happen.
Yeah, I think that comes back to some of our early discussions about that, is trying to keep public safety in mind with it, as well as providing them, some tasty eats.
All right, anything else on this one from anybody? Otherwise, I think that's all we had on the agenda for tonight. We just wanted to at least get these in front of you so you can see what we're working on and what, we want to. I think we got some direction on some of it, so we can at least bring some things back at the next meeting. Are there any future agenda items?
We're anticipating something related to the Dvorak development, likely in December and/or January. That's the Highway 51 West area. Might be facilitating some additional conceptual stuff and getting that to us, so that we'd anticipate. There may be a CU conditional use permit related to the American Fence location at Williams Drive and Glacier Moraine Drive. Those are a couple topics we'd anticipate in the next couple months.
Yeah, and there's really not a whole lot to update on the Quick Trip. They're still working with the neighbors there, and obviously they're not here tonight. So, but I know they're still working through some things. I think that's all we had for tonight. So I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
A second by Caravello. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Have a good night.
Night all.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.